Hi everyone, it's Laura. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to view my topic, and I'm really looking forward to learning about everyone's topics as well. I hope you enjoy. So let's get started. So the question I will be discussing today is, how did the Asian financial crisis affect modern economic relations? For my discussion, I will give a brief history of the Asian financial crisis, to which I will go into East Asian regionalism and how the Asian financial crisis prompted it. In East Asian regionalism, I argue that production networks have been the main source of economic integration. Afterwards, I will discuss the China factor and the influence that China has had in economic integration. Finally, I will wrap up my discussion. I argue that capital account liberalization was the main cause of the Asian financial crisis. The Washington Consensus was a set of economic policy prescriptions considered to be the standard reform package for crisis-racked countries that was promoted by the U.S. Treasury, the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, and WTO, or the World Trade Organization. These economic policies did not have substantial proof to the claim that rapid liberalization of markets was the best way of attaining and sustaining growth. Most likely they were used by the U.S. and other Western institutions to project their worldview onto East Asian countries. Joseph Stiglitz, a renowned economist, likened the economic policies laid out by financial ministers of afflicted economies as putting a new engine into an old car. This metaphor speaks to the highly accelerated economic growth of Asian tiger countries and the lack of safety nets provided by both domestic and international financial institutions. The pressure for capital account liberalization was the main motivator behind aggressive investment by Japanese banks into other countries, especially because of the domestic economic difficulties Japan faced. Coupled with doubled maturity of loans and currency devaluation, the crisis devastated economies whose economic growth was once called a miracle. After the crisis, the effect that China and India felt were minimal. This was because of the strong capital account controls which allowed them to avoid economic ruin, and was why they were able to grow significantly in the years thereafter. Along with putting China and India in a position to surpass their competitors, the crisis revealed that current economic institutions were insufficient to deal with any sort of economic crises. Therefore, a critical juncture in history revealed the weakness of ASEAN because of their lack of involvement in providing any kind of aid to countries like Thailand. This was mainly because Indonesia, which was the head of ASEAN at the time, also suffered as a result of the crisis, which rendered the organization insufficient. This showed that ASEAN did not have enough influence and capital to act as an institution separate from the countries that composed it. Furthermore, the crisis developed a concept of the Asian region afterwards. Because the IMF and WTO also failed to provide crisis countries with aid, they looked within the region for economic growth. Therefore, while there were past initiatives like the 1985 Plaza Accords that were meant to promote regional trade integration, it really began after the Asian financial crisis. Now on to East Asian regionalism. The way in which East Asian countries decided to pursue economic integration was through production networks. These are bilateral agreements between corporations whose purpose is to fragment the production process for greater efficiency. There are two ends of the production spectrum, one being production within a transnational corporation that operates with one or more subsidiaries, and the other being companies at arm's length, who function entirely dependent upon market behavior. Furthermore, there are two kinds of production networks, one being for parts and components and the other being for finished products. East Asian countries seems to fall closer to the former end of the spectrum, as most of these economies began to recover by creating bilateral trade agreements in which their recovery was based on the export they made to their trading partners, these exports being mostly parts and components. Just to get an idea of what the fragmentation process looks like, before fragmentation, all production blocks are linked together and are usually done by one company and its subsidiaries, where after fragmentation the production blocks are separated and connected by service links. When compared to the US-Mexico nexus, East Asian production networks look far more complicated. If you look at the direction of the arrows, they are one-sided, that being indicative of the bilateral nature of many of these trade frameworks. Furthermore, with the exception of Japan, East Asian countries follow a trend of exporting parts to China, where they are assembled and then exported by China to the United States. This graph shows machinery as a share of total exports and imports on manufactured goods. All figures are calculated using export and import statistics for bilateral trade in manufactured goods. All dark red represents export machinery and parts and components, while the dark blue represents import machinery, parts, and components. The light red is exports of finished product machinery, while the light blue is imports machinery of finished products. As we can see, East Asian countries like Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam highly benefit from these export machinery, parts, and components trade, whereas countries like Japan and China and Hong Kong benefit more from import machinery, parts, and components, to which they export finished components, usually to the United States. The effects of the production network have been increasing intra-regional trade, vertical specialization, which has allowed for countries to specialize in a very specific aspect of the production process, as well as business cycle synchronization. This is when economies with close ties are likely to experience patterns of booms and busts in their domestic economies, because these trade links serves as a channel that transmits economic shocks between them. The three primary features of synchronization are exports, private consumption, and gross fixed capital formation. This newfound trend of synchronization in production networks is stronger in exporting goods as opposed to importing goods, and has generally been stronger among ASEAN countries. China and Japan are distant from other Asian countries in terms of private consumption and gross fixed capital, but they run parallel when looking at export synchronization. This distance is most likely due to their position as competitors in leading regional economic growth. Furthermore, high economic cooperation has been achieved because production networks are highly decentralized and allow for a lot more mobility and economic growth. This kind of cooperation fits the region because of how highly diverse it is among political, cultural, and linguistic lines. Now to briefly discuss the China factor. China has continued steady growth even after the Asian financial crisis. It has become the main exporter of the region. Also, it has become particularly competitive in the electrical machine industry. However, its high economic growth has made other Asian countries wonder, is it a supplement or complement to East Asian economies? While China has become a competitor in exports, the production networks in the region have created a new foster of division in labor, and where countries have benefited from exporting components to China. In regards to the large amount of influence China has had in these production networks, it has opened up the opportunity for smaller, less developed countries to specialize in parts and components production. Since the end of the Asian financial crisis, China has been steadily increasing its exports to the rest of East Asia. As we can see, there has been growth from 1996 all the way to 2007, in which China has been increasing its exports to the rest of the region. Furthermore, China's rapid technological innovations over the last quarter century have been of further benefit to countries due to technological spillovers. Thus, while the anxieties over China's growth are well-founded, China's expansion and growth has been symbiotic to the growth in the rest of the region. And now I'll wrap everything up. To understand why production networks have been so successful in attaining economic integration, it is important to look at existing institutions. ASEAN, as well as ASEAN Plus 3 and ASEAN Plus 6, have gathered countries together to discuss integration, but have not brought about any effective change. An example of this is the Chiang Mai Initiative, which was established in 2000, but as of 2012, only 30% of funds are available to crisis countries before they begin good faith negotiations with the IMF. Furthermore, the initiative has never been implemented. Now, to look at the ADB, or the Asian Development Bank, and the AIIB, or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, both have similar goals in providing investment opportunities for developing countries. But because they are in competition with one another, and because AIIB only came about in 2015, it is difficult to say how much they have contributed to economic integration. And finally, when looking at RCEP, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, it is a free trade agreement that is looking to enhance integration, but is working upon the foundations set by these production networks among countries that already have trade relationships with one another. Therefore, these economic institutions are not truly diverting from the framework set up by production networks, but instead are reinforcing these trade ties through a variety of means. Now, looking to the future, production networks have been and continue to be the unifying force of economic integration. In order for East Asian economic influence to expand, it must look beyond the region and encourage multilateral production networks. Thank you. Hi guys! Once again, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to view my topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And yeah, thank you so much.